Hello there, this is James Scroft, it is 1978, and as I probably explained in far too much detail in part 1 of this series, Links Down as the Underbar, the original Halloween was, and remains to this day, the gravitational centre of the entire slasher movie universe, with every slasher film that came after it either seeking to emulate it, no matter how unconsciously, deliberately moving away from it and doing what John Carpenter didn't do in the hopes of usurping his crown, or deconstructing the film along with all of its bastard offspring.
Every other slasher that came after the original Halloween was mimicking Halloween. It's considered the perfect slasher movie.
And leaving my discussion of some of the defining scenes in that movie for the end, when I pan the insults to the original Halloween films which Rob Zombie was either arrogant, stupid, or delusional enough to believe were remakes honouring the original movies, Halloween 2 wasn't so much a sequel as it was literally the second half of the original film, continuing the story of Michael's attempt to kill Laurie on Halloween night 1978 and slaughtering anyone who crossed his path without skipping a beat. But while this makes it excellent and an absolute must-see if you watched the original, Halloween 2 already showed the early symptoms of sequel syndrome, the unspoken compulsion for sequels to be bigger and better than the original, making full use of the bigger budget and better special effects, in this case being a slasher movie, by making the deaths more original, elaborate and spectacular, while ultimately adding nothing to the story. With John Carpenter declaring the Michael Myers story to be over though after we saw him being incinerated at the end of the previous film, the plan with Halloween 3 was for it to be the first in a franchise of what would be standalone horror films released every year, unconnected from one another aside from the common thread of Halloween, almost like the skits in a Simpsons Treehouse of Horrors episode. And as a result, Halloween 3 is so utterly removed from the first two Halloween movies that in that fictional universe, the original film is shown on TV. So while it isn't necessarily a bad movie per se, the fact that Michael Myers is the Halloween franchise means that Halloween 3 is catfishing, luring us in with the promise of being something that it's not, meaning that just as we do when we find out that the 19-year-old cellist from Prague with whom we've been flirting online is actually a 48-year-old gas fitter called Stuart from Sunderland, all that we can do is walk away while attempting to ignore the feeling that not only have we been cheated, but that we were absolute idiots for falling for it in the first place. Next, however, came Halloween 4, the first blatant rip-off cash-in in what's been dubbed the Pink Panther trilogy, because Halloween 4, 5 and 6 share exactly the same taglines as three of the movies in the Pink Panther franchise, but while it is undeniably a cash-in retcon declaring that both Michael and Dr. Loomis somehow miraculously survived being incinerated at the end of Halloween 2, and even without that being the case, it could never have hoped to hold a candle to the original films, it's actually pretty damn good by the standards of most slasher movies, and much more than that though. As far as I'm concerned, Halloween 4 is the ultimate definitive conclusion of the Halloween franchise, because although at the end Michael had been sent back to hell where he belongs, having spent the entire movie attempting to kill his young niece Jamie because Jamie Lee Curtis was already beyond being over this shit and wouldn't come back for another sequel as Laurie Strode, the film concludes with the demon, presence, power, force, or whatever we choose to call it that had possessed or controlled Michael, possessing or controlling Jamie, because no different from energy, evil cannot be created or destroyed, but instead merely take another form. What's that? A powerful, dramatic and thrilling conclusion leaving absolutely no room for a sequel? Not when there's profit to be gouged, you pinko commie art lover. So of course, Halloween 5 is the worst possible insult to our intelligence bearing this title until Halloween Resurrection, existing for literally no other reason than to undermine the ending of Halloween 4 and thus pave the way for even more sequels by insisting that no, Michael's still alive, he has a psychic connection with Jamie, and that's what caused her to mimic him temporarily, but we've made her even more of a helpless victim now, so you should feel at least double the sympathy for her, especially considering the fact that we've declared that being a little girl, she was only able to injure her foster mother with the scissors at the end of the previous movie. Apparently helping will ignore the fact that, according to that exact same just-a-child logic, as a 6-year-old boy, Michael couldn't possibly have killed his sister at the beginning of the original movie either, unless, demonic possession, bestowing superhuman strength and the ability to survive and regenerate from any injury, including being shot in both eyes and fucking incinerated. Speaking of which, while I freely admit that bringing back Dr. Sam Loomis with a few burn scars after he'd completed his admittedly forced and paper-thin redemption arc at the end of the first sequel by incinerating both himself and Michael in order to save Laurie is also an insult, the fundamental difference is that, as we just saw, the ending of Halloween 4 is so iconic that I can forgive and forget literally everything else, since that single scene justified the retcon, while on the other hand, Halloween 5 has no scene or moment which comes within a single light year of justifying the wanton dismissal and demolition of such a bone-chilling and genre-defining conclusion, because, as I mentioned earlier, as an entity in itself, Halloween 5's sole purpose and reason to exist is laying the groundwork for more sequels. As a matter of fact, my utter contempt and sheer loathing for this entire Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice level of, oh shit, we need to hash out another sequel to set up the next sequel, otherwise we won't be able to gouge more profit from the mindless consuming fanboys, is summed up by this single and largely irrelevant scene.
All clear.
Nothing above, nothing below.
What about Max?
Adobe, right?
This is not happening to me. Max! Max, what have you done? I'm so embarrassed.
It's what we're here for.
Rescue cats.
Find dogs.
That's a job.
And we love it.
Because, excuse me, fucking Laurel and Hardy type music in a scene reassuring the woman that everything's fine and her actually believing that it is and not remaining tense, suspicious and alert, while at the same time making it clear that these officers are the comic relief in a fucking Halloween movie, a series that was, at least at the beginning, not only built upon suspense, but effectively wrote the book upon building suspense for all other slasher films to follow. A book which the creators of Halloween 5 apparently read before asking, "Tension? What's that? The thing that comes before 11-tion?" But if you thought that Halloween 5 was bad, then brace yourselves for part 3 of this series, because with the possible exception of H2O, it's all downhill from here.
And all the girlies say I'm pretty fly for a white guy.